I have been wanting to do this for quite some time now, and I've kind of put it off for a multitude of different reasons, definitely. One, because I'm not really keen on reading charts without accurate birth times, but also because in part I think that I am a little bit nervous to see what comes out in the process of reading this. I have channeled a lot in relation to Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie within the past month, but over a month. This very curious situation, which I have found myself in, predicting things before they occur or before they are released by the media, ultimately was not an active choice necessarily on my behalf. Not to say that I don't appreciate or I'm happy to be of service in the situation. It's just that I began hearing keywords about Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie before I even knew who they were. But that literally is a story for a different day, as I want this to be a reading, quite literally, of their natal charts. I don't want to get into the psychic element of it. I actually am very, very exhausted by that as a whole. I want to get into their charts to the best of my ability without times, and talk about what I can see and what I can sense in relation to the people that they are. Or maybe I even should say that they were. I should mention, by the way, I have a tiny human child in the background. So if there are weird noises that you guys do hear, it is due to the fact that there is an almost 1-year-old Scorpio, actually, sitting beside me. The one thing that I felt really strongly about reading this as a whole, there was like a couple things that were just really, really important to me about this process. One is to remain as unbiased as I possibly can, so that I can get a clear interpretation of the energy that I am sensing between these two, as well as them separately. But also, I want to aim to do so with as much care and as much consideration and as much empathy as I possibly can. As the truth is, when I look at Gabby Petito's chart, my heart hurts. But even more than that, I guess I can't help but see myself in Gabby. And I did make a post about this. I posted about the fact that Gabby Petito in general, the one thing that I have noticed in correlation to her and her case and everything that has transpired out of it, how many people that have been found in the process of this poor girl's tragic ending. The one thing that I've taken note of the very, very most is the fact that she is living in true Piscean glory. She is serving as a beautiful mirror, ultimately, for a lot of things that need to be taken note of, definitely. But for so many people who have been through situations like her. And I mention that as being true Piscean glory because that is what Pisces does. Pisces serves as a mirror. As the 12th sign of the zodiac, we look to Pisces and we see the path. We see the path in its quintessential essence. Approaching astrology from an esoteric perspective, on a soul level, growth related plane, we're looking at the zodiac sign Pisces as walking all 11 paths before them. And this is why they say that Pisces is so good at empathy. They're good at empathy because they embrace all 12 archetypes. They have experienced all 12 signs at some point in their incarnation. Again, this is from an esoteric perspective. But due to this, Pisces does have that mirror-like quality for people because people are able to see themselves within Pisces as well. And it's kind of a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. It's due to what I did mention about empathy, with Pisces being able to empathize with everyone. Everyone sees themselves within Pisces. The one thing that I can say hands down without a doubt is that Gabby Petito would have very, very much so embraced this empathy. And she would have embraced this empathy in her communication with other people. I would make the qualified educational guess that she was probably the type of person to reach out and ask someone how they were before that person even went about showcasing or even expressing that there was something wrong. And actually, I bet that that was even more so true, the action-oriented kind of energy to all of that, like her reaching out to people. I say this largely due to the fact that her Mercury is wide orb, Jupiter in Aries. It would have all been seen in her action, definitely. And that action alone would have brought her a lot of luck. It would have brought a lot of people probably to her as well. She would have had a certain optimism that she did give off. Probably a slight fight to her in that process too, where she would have not only known what to say, but she also would have encouraged people to stand up for themselves mentally. From the standpoint of purpose, this is a good one to touch on because it is really kind of cool to see the way that that did play out for her and to see that she was really, really pushing to live in line with purpose, to follow her soul in a lot of ways. When we look to the North Node within the natal chart, we see purpose. We see your destination. As an astrologer, the way that I like to read this or describe it to people is like if you consider your natal chart a map. Your natal chart is this opening. It's this opening into the universe in which you chose to individually come here and to have this human experience. When we look to the North Node within the natal chart, we see your destination. So if you're considering your natal chart as a map, as a whole, the North Node is your end game. It's where you're headed. It's where you're going. While when we look to the South Node, which is the opposing node to the North, we see the past. We see where you're coming from. From an esoteric perspective, again, we can see the potential for past life connections here. But typically, the way that it does manifest on an everyday kind of level is that you pop into existence via your South Node. You're there, you're comfortable here, this is where you came from, and then you move towards your North Node. Speaking on this, her North Node within her chart is in Leo. Leo is the sign of creative expression. It is the sign of performance. It is the sign of the sun. It's ruled by the sun. And I always thought that when I was reading what people were saying kind of in correlation to Gabby and her having this very sunny demeanor. What that ultimately shows is that she was in line with purpose. And with her being a Leo North Node as well, you're seeing the sun ruling that. You're seeing the influence of the masculine and fatherly figures actually impacting that greatly. That's not to say that mom did not play her part. She definitely did. She also has a trine to her moon. So her mother was very, very much so in support of this purpose as well. In support of her creativity, in support of her expression, in support of those performance-related drives. Gabby within her lifetime was to move towards being comfortable with standing center stage in some variety. And so what other better way do you go about doing that than to become an influencer ultimately? But not just any influencer, an influencer that was incredibly creative. Obviously, she was always drawing, she was always showcasing things that she had created. It's at moments like this where I sincerely wish that I did have a birth time for her because online it looks like people have speculated. I actually did not go in to look and see anyone's speculations because I knew that that would just throw me off personally, intuitively. I need to go with my soul. But personally from her, I was feeling the potential for an air ascendant like Gemini, Libra, something airy. She looked airy to me physically. But it is very, very possible too. I could have been picking up on her sun Mercury conjunction, as the way that that would have operated would have been similar to that of a Gemini sun, except it's Piscean. So it would have been highly intuitive. Her communication would have been highly intuitive. She potentially could have been a channel. She could have intuited a lot in general. in life as a whole. And that gift as a whole could have very well stemmed from her father, or he at least very much so supported that in some way. He impacted her communication. He impacted her to speak, to talk, and probably to do so in this very, very considerate and kind, compassionate way. I'm sure that their relationship as a whole did involve a very, very strong element of communication. And in turn, that shaped her, and she utilized that communication in some way. As a Pisces woman myself, who was actually raised by a Pisces too, I can very, very much so say that it is rare that you meet a Pisces woman who does not idealize their dad. Or men in general, that we can get that connotation, definitely, sometimes to our detriment completely. But I always say that my father in general created some very, very big shoes for a man to fill. And it's due to the fact that Pisces dads are, Pisces, like literal, the fish, their fathers, especially for a woman in general, they are just incredibly caring. It's even very possible that she could have had a strong intuitive connection with dad. Dad might have really utilized intuition a lot himself, and that shaped her to be the way that she was as a Piscean fish woman. While her mom, on the other hand, is her war. That's her ability to wage war as an Aries moon. Mom was the fighter. Mom was the one that taught her to defend herself. But she also, in this very, very large way, would have taught her how to love. As she is a Moon-Venus person, that conjunction is absolutely beautiful. I'm sure that there was a lot of love that was felt between her and her mother, and in her relationship with her mother, definitely. Aries moon people as a whole, Aries is a sign of independent action. It's a sign of action in general. Aries moon mothers are very active, and in turn they shape their lunar spawn, we could say, to be very active themselves. She also does have a wide conjunction to Saturn, and the Venus conjunction is also wider, but still they are important, especially with somebody who would be incredibly sensitive to energy. I should say that Venus and Saturn being conjunct her moon widely, that's very dependent on her birth time, but I have this feeling she's like after 20 degrees. Her moon is like later degrees Aries. Anytime essentially after 6 a.m., that conjunction would be in effect, even if it is wider. For her, I'm going to consider very wide orbs, and there's actually a reason for that. And I will touch on that a little bit further on. But another thing that does further strengthen my belief that her moon is somewhere around the 20-degree range is that I do get a strong feeling that she was experiencing moon square Pluto. There's a couple different reasons for that. One being that she did mention anxiety, but that isn't necessarily the indicator per se. It's more so the fact that although obviously this was a very, very tense time in Gabby's life and in her relationship with Brian, at the same time, a lot of the accounts that you do see about her, or things that are have been said in relation to people who witnessed her, a lot of those situations she was incredibly emotional within them, and that's not to say that that isn't justified. However, the heightened emotion and the fact that she was seen crying so many times, I just have a really, really strong feeling that moon square Pluto is in effect, and ultimately, again, the moon is somewhere beyond 20 degrees. But the conjunction to Saturn from the moon would have given her a seriousness in her emotional nature, definitely. Sometimes she might even have held back emotionally, not openly necessarily expressed everything that she was feeling to others. Aries moons in general are often highly independent. When they're down and out, they need to go off on their own. They need to get it out of their system. Action, like literally taking action, working out, doing something like hiking would be a great way or a great outlet for that emotionalism. It's just an incredibly independent sign. And so I'm sure that if she was feeling emotionally off, she was someone who was one to take the initiative in a way and handle it on her own. When we're dealing with Saturn, like as a planet as a whole, and the impact of Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn. Capricorn's phrase is "I use," and I mention this due to the fact that Saturn impacting a luminary, especially the moon, there's a strong emphasis on usability when it comes to emotion. If the emotion is not necessarily deemed as useful, sometimes it can even be hard for them to express it. Now, this is a wider conjunction to Saturn. So, although this would be true, it wouldn't be super, super prominent. But I'm sure that, again, her emotional nature was incredibly independent. She wasn't someone who necessarily needed somebody to hold her hand through certain things. And I don't mean that in a way of brashness. I mean that more so that she wouldn't have accepted it. Having this Saturn-Venus conjunction within her natal chart, you're seeing love that gets better with time. She could have struggled definitely earlier in life with relationships in some capacity, especially in her ability to feel secure within those relationships. And given that she still was very young and she hadn't reached her Saturn return yet, there's a very strong possibility that this was something that she hadn't mastered yet, is a good way of putting it. That feeling of security in a partnership, especially even potentially from a material standpoint. As Venus and Taurus people, I can tell you we are good food, fine wine people. That is love for us in a lot of ways. It's the sensual aspects of life. Good smelling things, comfortable things, things that we can invest into. Keyword on the word things, though, as Taurus rules over the second house of materialism. But it's not quite so simple, because although we can connect physical belongings, Taurus's phrase is "I have," financial, fiscal type themes to Taurus energy, you have to look at the component of why any people seek to have to begin with. It is for security, earthly, worldly security. And there would be a theme in this in correlation to the way that Gabby did go about loving, as well as how she would want to receive love. They say that Venus and Taurus people can also have this tendency to stay in bad situations for longer than they should due to the investment that is posed within their minds very often, the time that they have put into something. Yeah, she does have a pretty decent square to Neptune as well from that Venus. So there is the definite possibility for deception in partnership as well. I don't like using that word per se, as it is a very vague way to explain the qualities of Neptune. But it can cultivate martyr-like attributes. It can cultivate situations where you are giving to people that don't necessarily deserve to be receiving. But there can also be a very, very strong rose-colored glasses feel with that as well, where you're potentially not seeing partners clearly either. You're seeing them in a more idealized way than you should. And this is not to say that this is the case in every single situation. But for somebody with Venus conjunct Saturn, I would say that that is probably a lesson that she did have to work through, as there would have been a lot of lessons in correlation to love as a whole. I'm pointing that out specifically, though. I feel like I'm just butchering it the more I try to put it into words, so that I don't have somebody listen to this and say, well, my Venus-Neptune doesn't do that. There's always a highest and a lowest development to absolutely everything. And I am attempting to speak from the place that intuitively I would guess Gabby probably struggled from. And that's, again, all supported by other aspects within her chart. Like, for instance, her Venus being almost dead on conjunct Saturn, and the frustrations potentially that one could cultivate in relation to love, and the ability also for love to kind of grow with time. Venus-Saturn has this very fine wine type attribute to it. Things do get better with time, but they also tend to get better with time due partly to the fact that we do have to experience certain struggles in order to get there. I'm going to point this out because I ended up jotting it down. And I thought that maybe it had something to do with what I did read somewhere in my research, as I have had to do research, and I don't even mean in like an internet sleuth kind of way. I've had to do it because of what I'm hearing. But I remember reading that Gabby and Brian were engaged in July of 2020, and then ultimately they called off that engagement for some reason, potentially due to COVID, potentially due to maturity. There was a time period that was highlighted for Gabby personally in which love would have been very sticky. It would have felt limited in a way. It could have been a hard time in love and in her relationship with Brian ultimately. And that would have been December of 2020. At first when I saw this date, I was getting this feeling that this connected to them calling off their engagement. But from what I'm reading, it looks like that occurred more so right before they left or something along those lines. So what I'm wondering more so is if intuitively that's what I was receiving, is that this time period was like a prominent something occurred around this time that did involve that engagement being called off, or it's part of why it was. But the way that I have seen Saturn and Aquarius act out, Saturn is a planet of restriction. It's a planet of limitation. In Aquarius, you're seeing restriction and limitation to the people, quite literally. But very largely what I've noticed with this ingress of Saturn in Aquarius is that the restrictions that it seems to be posing are very, very largely due to COVID restrictions. But with her having Venus in Taurus, square Saturn in Aquarius, those COVID-related restrictions, quote unquote, could essentially have been material in some way. And this could be completely unrelated to their engagement and that situation in general. But there is a really good chance there could have been financial stuff that could have popped up around that time. But I wanted to mention that one due to the fact that it is love and it is a hard period to move through, especially because she wasn't only dealing with the Venus square, she was also dealing with the Saturn square to Saturn. I know that by the end of this reading I will reach something, and I know because I was told to take my time on this for some reason, and she does have quite a few squares to Neptune as a whole, so there would have been certain things, certain situations involving people, places, things where she just might not have, she might have given people the benefit of the doubt in certain situations where it might not have been the best thing to do per se. What am I trying to get to with this one? She just would have been an incredibly idealistic person. She would have been incredibly sweet. When I first saw her chart, one of the very first things that I was pulled to instantly was her Chiron in Sagittarius. Chiron within the natal chart, it shows us an area of wounding. It shows us an area of sensitivity. But the reason as to why I was pulled to this placement as a whole is Sagittarius is quite literally the sign of travel. It's the sign of adventure. It's the sign of expansion. It's also the sign that correlates to faith and belief, though, as well. I made some very accurate predictions timeline-wise. I feel like I can't talk today. I've been working all day, so I apologize. My brain is tired. Timeline-wise, to her Chiron, as it was conjunct the South Node right around the very end of September. Which, it appears like that one was exact on September 20th. But, you're going to see important events highlighted between 9:20 and 10:03, which that was a major time period. I know that is when her body was found. I do believe that is when they began searching for Brian in the reserve. I know that there was a lot between that time period, definitely. It's fascinating to me because that Chiron being on the South Node, during that time, you're showing the wound, quote unquote, her wound, being accentuated, but it is from a past-related perspective. So it's like it's bringing the past into the present again, which would showcase something like finding a body. But it's just kind of crazy to me that it lines up so intricately due to the fact that, again, Sagittarius is the sign of travel. But that one as a whole, like, makes me wonder in relation to Gabby, beyond the travel emphasis, Chiron in Sagittarius can very often struggle with a wound, quote unquote, that would correlate to belief, to faith. I wonder if that was like ever an issue for her, if she struggled in being able to have faith in certain situations. She has, I mean, her Chiron is pretty well supported. There's a trine to her sun, so her father or masculine figures in her upbringing especially would have greatly assisted in this. They probably would have brought her back to faith. She also has a trine to Jupiter in Aries, and that is the ruler of Sag, so that's greatly assisting. But there would have probably been certain like situations where she did struggle with that faith. There could have even been a struggle or a feeling of not being free in some situations, like her freedom being hindered in some capacity or needing freedom. But something about that freedom could have, or seeking it out even potentially, could have been painful. I just got like a flash of her friend Rose talking about them going to the bar and like Brian taking her ID and stuff like that. That kind of stuff. In that case, I'm pretty sure she still went, which would probably be the trine to Jupiter in Aries, as it's taking independent action. It's saying, fuck this, I'm going anyways. I'm going to give the fair warning that I am a very blunt person, so I might say fuck again. But that would be kind of the types of situations where the freedom, like there was a wound correlating to that freedom. It's 444 as I'm opening my recorder. I went and looked up to see whether or not Gabby actually did go about going to the bar. And it looks like, I'm not actually sure, but she did flip out on him and she did, I think, slap him or something along those lines. That's the Jupiter and Aries trine. That's the ability to stand up for yourself in a situation. However, that article led me even further down the rabbit hole because as I was like skimming through that, trying to look for that, I saw something that said something about Brian having episodes where he would like hear voices. That's interesting to me for a number of reasons. One, because hands down, without a doubt, that could strengthen my theory about him having Chiron in his third house, which is, I explain as a mental wound is a good way of putting it, which obviously that would be the case, I mean, from a mental health related standpoint, but hearing voices quite literally is a third house thing. It is a third house theme. I also found that fascinating though because he has a Pisces South Node, and when I was trying to like channel information in relation to Gabby, like quite literally connect to her, I heard something along the lines of there's a good chance Brian could hear you too, or like feel you too, your energy as well, like you were doing with him. But he's not in a good place mentally right now. That probably wouldn't be possible. It was something along those lines. I even wrote it down. It's fascinating to me because Brian's purpose being Virgo, and his South Node being Pisces, it's just really, really interesting. I don't even know if I want to add this part into this, but it's interesting to me because I am a Pisces North Node person. So my purpose is where Brian was, or where he has already been, is a good way of putting it. And obviously I'm sitting here hearing voices, and those voices for me are real. I mean, it's verified. But it shows you kind of how fate works in a sense. Because as somebody with a Virgo North Node, you're utilizing, or you're being urged to utilize within this lifetime, logic rather than intuition. Virgo is the sign of health. It is the sign of the physical body, the physical temple. It's not even to say that this is a gift per se that Brian could develop or should have developed or anything along those lines within this life, because life wouldn't have granted that to him. It would have granted that ability to take the logical route and say, I'm having an episode right now. And that isn't to say that it isn't in an episode either. Definitely. That's not what I'm getting to at all. I found that correlation to be really, really interesting. But it does further strengthen what my theory was in relation to him being a potential Virgo rising. But to go even more further out there, it actually makes me wonder as well about what I wrote down about cluster B. Hearing voices. That is Mercury. Square the notes. Mercury and Sagittarius square his north node in Virgo and his south node in Pisces. But the cluster B thing was really, really interesting because I wrote that down. I had no idea what it was. It was around the time that my son was diagnosed with COVID. I dealt with that through this process of channeling as well. And I thought that it was something COVID related. I didn't even realize this was a Brian Laundrie thing until I finally Googled it. And I was like, holy shit. This obviously does not pertain to Sebastian. But again, you can see a wound that correlates to faith as well as belief as well, along with travel and expansion. And if I take that one step further and I mention the fact that Brian's Pluto is conjunct her Chiron, you're seeing the seat of his personal power and control influencing and essentially activating that wound. And Pluto as a whole, with him being a Scorpio, is a massive thing because it's his ruler. Essentially, what that would show me is his power and control would be wounding to her, which in this case and in this instance is it's definitive. You can see how that would play out. But I did want to mention that about the ID and about that situation, the manipulative quote-unquote attribute, that was wounding. It was wounding in a way that it somehow probably hindered Gabby's freedom, and potentially even her faith in certain things. As although situations like that would ultimately be painful for most people, or at the very least very frustrating, it would have hurt Gabby. But where this becomes just so much more messed up to me is that I consider the fact that Pluto is the ruler of Scorpio. I consider his actions, I consider what he's doing. I consider the highest development and the lowest development of Scorpio. Scorpio works within an evolutionary cycle. You begin with the scorpion on the ground, then you transverse to the eagle, and then eventually the phoenix or the dove. Ultimately, actions like that were very, very much so Scorpio on the ground related. The Scorpio on the ground is the most primitive and primal stage of Scorpio's evolution. Fuck, fight, survive. Because quite literally, survival is the key component there. But where that becomes even trickier in the case of Brian Laundrie is the fact that he has Chiron in Scorpio. That's what messes up the entire ordeal. Because Brian's Scorpio energy is wounded. And that just takes me right back to the need to heal thyself. But it also does a thing to my mind where I take into consideration the fact that Pluto is the ruler of his sun in Scorpio. Where was that behavior learned? Or where was that behavior embraced? How was that behavior condoned? What made that behavior seem okay? That is the masculine. That is the sun. That is the father or male figures in the upbringing. Now, that's not me saying that his father is like that per se, but somehow he would have shaped that behavior. As a Scorpio, the Scorpio father archetype can go many, many different ways, but very often there is a very powerful figure sitting behind the chair. But I'm mentioning this due to the fact that, which I will later go into, during this entire catastrophe, Brian was dealing with his moon in Cancer, square Chiron in Aries. The moon in Cancer, the zodiac sign as a whole, quite literally involves home and family. The wound in general was a wound that was cultivated via the origin. When I look at Gabby's chart, like as a whole, like she has this like incredibly gentle energy, definitely. Now that is not to say that she did not have an inner warrior woman, because there is massive warrior woman energy that is coming from this chart with an Aries moon. But even that warrior woman energy was very, very tamed by Saturn. She has Mars in Scorpio, and this one is like a major focal point for me, definitely. It's a focal point because it is within a 2-degree orb conjunction to Brian Laundrie's Chiron in Scorpio. Mars within the natal chart shows our fight. It shows aggression. It shows our ability to defend ourselves. Gabby's Mars is retrograde though. So when it comes to that defense, it would have expressed itself very interestingly, is a good way of putting it. She has a fairly tight square to Uranus in Aquarius, which I do believe would have been activated via his Jupiter. Yeah. I wrote this down, and so I think that it's probably a good thing to add in right here. Right around the time that Brian and Gabby left for their road trip. At least I do believe that it was right around that time. I'm really bad at trying to find information. I know that it says like in multiple places that was in June. This would have been exact the first week in June. When I use the word exact, I mean that it is at a height. It is the strongest. The energy is the strongest. And actually, it looks like this would have been like the last week in May. I apologize. First week in June. And I did take note of the fact that it does appear as though they went on the road trip in July, I do believe. Bear with me. I know that these two connect somehow, for some reason. Because whatever she was experiencing right around that time period, it connects back to experiences that she would have had around mid-April. But there is some sort of sudden aggressive feel to it. Along with limitation, friends could have been involved in this. People in some way could have been involved in this. It's even possible that she could have experienced technology malfunctions around this time. But it's really important because I wonder like what kind of experiences it was that she could have been having at this time. It's like right before they left. I wonder if she experienced opposition in relation to leaving. I wonder if friends potentially were involved in that in some way, or if like there was even like the possibility of like not being able to go. I don't know. There was something about that time frame. I'm just not sure exactly what that something would be. Unless that was the time frame potentially when certain engagement related stuff was called off. I was just hearing something about that body cam video of her. And the way that she spoke about being OCD. The way that Brian would have activated that within her is that he would have like pushed these very, very sudden, quick bursts of expansion and almost evolution on her behalf. But I wonder if she felt the need even potentially to fight against that because it was change and it was scary in some way. And that is purely going off of what she said. That's not making any other, it's not connecting into anything else about where her mind was at. If that was truly the case, if she did feel as though she experienced OCD, I could see that being an activation point for that, because it would create this very unpredictable energy, and it might be frustrating due to how sudden Uranian energy works. It creates like very sudden, quick change. But to take that one step further, another thing that you can definitely see from Mars square Uranus, especially in a 3-degree orb, is sudden aggressive situations that do come on. Mars is the masculine. You could see that manifesting both ways. You could see her getting suddenly upset or angry, or you could see the people around her, men largely, getting upset, suddenly angry. If you were to tie Brian into this instance, it would probably be posed via her activating a wound for him, correlating to Scorpio, which Scorpio connects to all things that go bump in the night. Death, sex, and rock and roll. But you can also see shared resources here as well. You can also see a wound that correlates to power and control. So to put this in the very simplest terms that I possibly can, when it comes to Brian and the way that he influenced her from a painful standpoint, it is power and control related. It is literally him exerting his personal power. But when we look at Gabby and the way that she would have influenced Brian in these instances of a painful variety, it would have been her getting upset, her anger. I feel so deeply when I look at their charts, like this rectification attempt that I tried to do for Brian was accurate, that he is indeed a Virgo rising. And I had like a million reasons as to why I thought that this could be a possibility. But as I was explaining that anger and its triggering effect on Brian, I remembered that in that body cam footage, Gabby said something along the lines of him telling her to shut up. That would place his Pluto in his third house. It would be communication-related control. But it's not only that either, because it's the act of him telling her to shut up. He has Chiron in his third house in the chart that I did try to rectify, which would further strengthen that theory for me, because when you have Chiron in the third house, you're dealing with a wound that involves communication. So if he's telling her to shut up, it's probably because what she is quote-unquote saying to him is hurting him in some way. And I just have like a really strong feeling that a lot of the argumentative type stuff between them, although there could have very well been aggression involved, and I can see that too, it was communication related. Like it was words, it was what was being said. But okay, going back to Moab and August 12th and that time frame in general, there are a lot of things during that time frame. I want to start with one of the sweeter things. The thing that really stood out to me at the very beginning of this, I said that I was using whiter orbs with Gabby because I could tell that she was sensitive to energy. And it was actually this that really, really solidified that for me. When I watched that body cam footage, and this was a weird situation for me as well with the body cam footage, as it was another strange thing that I did that later I was like, oh, I looked up the body cam footage about 5 hours before they released like new footage. I was sitting there and like all of a sudden I kept getting blasted with like all this stuff in relation to body cam footage, and I'm like, what? I hadn't watched it. I hadn't done anything. I wasn't researching stuff into Gabby again, and I heard this about body cam footage, so I was like, okay. So I looked it up on Google or something along those lines to see like what it was all about, because I hadn't, again, watched it at all. The reason why this was like really strange to me though in particular was because the night before I had, or right around that time, I had Googled Cassie Laundrie because I was hearing something about a sister. So I Googled to see if he had a sister ultimately, because I was hearing this. And then like the next day they came out with an interview for her. It was just, this was like a long string of events where I had to like settle myself and begin to realize like, okay, I'm hearing like news related stuff before it's being released. Like that's what's occurring. This is not mediumship. Obviously this is like something clairvoyant or telepathic or something like that. This is something that I do experience too, by the way. But this case in general was just insane because I was not actively trying to do any of this. It just kept coming to me. But back to what I was going to say about Gabby, the sweeter part of this, and what made me realize she was sensitive to energy. On the day of that incident, August 12th, which is really weird because I keep hearing something about August 11th, and I don't know what that is. Like, I would be willing to guess that there's something prominent about August 11th, but I don't know what it is or why I keep thinking that it was the 11th. On August 12th, however, the sun was at 20 degrees Leo. It was within a 1 degree orb conjunction to Gabby's north node in Leo. In that body cam footage, you can see Gabby telling the officers at one point, I know, that she was OCD again, but it was due to her wanting to get all this stuff set up for her Instagram and for social media and all of this stuff as a whole. She was feeling very, very motivated. And yes, that might have also manifested with some OCD-like traits. But what that proved to me right there was her sensitivity to energy. Because with the sun being conjunct her north node, she was taking action, and it was action in correlation to purpose. That's why she was feeling that sense of urgency, because she could feel that it was in line with the time, is a good way of putting it. Gabby probably was not conscious of the fact that she did this. However, it was very apparent to me, oh, that's what you were doing on that day. That's why you were so driven and focused towards doing that. Because it was purpose related for you. Being an influencer, having a social media presence, it's one of the most Leo things that you can possibly do, especially as a creative individual. That just further strengthens what I'm saying. It's a sign of creativity. It is a sign of expression. It is the sign of performance. It is the sign that embraces this beautiful charisma. And it was very, very obvious to me that she was trying to do that. She was trying to fulfill that. That's why she felt that urgency ultimately. And push comes to shove, that proved to me that she has to or had to have been incredibly sensitive to the energy that was going on around her, because she was right in line. However, where this does get sticky is everything that was going on within the sky, transitory-wise, and how it was influencing both her and Brian on that day. One of the main things that I was pulled to automatically was Mars square Pluto. But it wasn't just Mars square Pluto, which they were both experiencing, that was even stronger for Gabby. When you have Mars and Pluto going up against each other, you have anger and aggression, and you have power, and you have control, and they are not playing nicely together. And they are especially not playing nicely when Mars is in Virgo, because Mars in Virgo has a tendency to be incredibly OCD and incredibly logical and incredibly planned and organized, along with incredibly nitpicky and focused on cleanliness and purity and all of these themes. The Mars-Pluto square was ultimately what was promoting and pushing the drive within her to do what she wanted to do, which was fated in nature. But it was the intense energy as well. It was the intensity of that entire situation between them. And this goes even further when you consider the fact that Mars was not only square Gabby and Brian's Plutos on that day, it was also square the nodes, which is just gross because it shows fated, aggressive situations. And the fate of aggressive situations are on a collective level. They're on a societal base front, not just Brian and Gabby. Everybody was experiencing things like this around this time, especially correlating to communication and belief, and ultimately expansion and travel, even because Sag is involved. But if Brian was indeed a Virgo rising, that would have just further been accentuated if Mars was conjunct his ascendant and square Pluto. It's interesting to me because in the article that I did end up catching, which was like her friend Rose like talking about stuff, she mentioned something about him getting pissed off, Gabby ending up crying, and he would come out of the situation calm. It was in reference to them having arguments, her never seeing them fight, but her knowing it. I actually do know exactly what that would be. That would be due to the fact that he's a Mars and Capricorn person. Cool as a cucumber when it comes to anger. But I'm saying this because if you watch that video, you can see the way he's reacting. You can see the way she's reacting. She is very emotionally distraught and upset, while he is very, very calm. The moon was in Libra at the time of that event, and it was square Brian's moon, which again is opposing his Mars. And what she said in that video was that he didn't believe in her and he was a bummer, and there was like a monetary element that was being posed in it. If he is indeed a Virgo rising, what my speculation would be in that situation is that the Libra moon square his moon in Cancer set him off because it was in his second house. That's the financial aspect of it all. That would have been what triggered it all. His Mars, again, has the potential to look calm and cool as a cucumber, even if upset, especially in a situation where you may need to save face. But that also would ultimately be why probably police in that situation would not have been able to read that situation so well, and would have in turn seen her as the aggressive one. I did want to go into Chiron, square Venus. It's really important to mention this one, definitely, especially in correlation to Brian, which is who I'm referencing in this instance. That square was exact on August 14th, but it was in play on August 12th. When you're dealing with Chiron in Aries, you are quite literally dealing with wounds that correlate to action and aggression, anger, and again, violence can definitely factor into this. Aries is the god of war. But what this would lead me to believe is that the 14th was probably an incredibly sensitive day for Brian, which is 2 days after Moab, so it was like the aftermath of that. He would have probably not been in the best spirits, emotionally especially, because of the square to his moon from Chiron as well. But I'm largely saying this because it was a redo of something that would have occurred back on the first week in June. And there were like two prominent time periods that I've mentioned now in correlation to that first week in June. I am throwing out all of these details in case they are somehow helpful to someone out there in the universe, because I know that when it comes to this, there's something that I am supposed to relay. There's no other reason as to why I have been receiving the insight that I have. I know that this is something I'm supposed to do. One thing that I can say had been revved up, and he would have been revved up pretty much the vast majority of August as a whole. There's also another time period which would have been prominent and faded at that. Yeah, see, I didn't even look at this. This would have been like right around August 25th, 26th. I don't even know timeline-wise what exactly occurred around that time, but I know that that would have been very close to her death ultimately. Was the 25th or the 26th around the Jackson Hole incident? It looks like that was the 27th. That's still close enough for that to be within orb, but there's a really good chance that 25th, 26th, he could have been even angrier. And that would be the case with or with not an accurate birth time. Or, I mean, my rectification effects, whether or not that those were correct. That would have been when Mars was conjunct his North Node. I wonder if he was trying to plan something or organize something. He does have Mercury square his nodes. He might have been the type of person to be overly idealistic in a way in those attempts at planning. Like, he might have really struggled with that. He might have struggled with that. Where he, like, his mind was on, like, big, broad horizons, but it wasn't, the delivery of that was, like, tough to achieve or do. I can hands down, without a doubt, 100% say that his mental state was fucked up. He was emotionally fucked up during this time. And that is due to the fact that he would have had transit Chiron opposite his moon. And it wasn't exact yet either. I mean, at this point, I do not believe that he is living, but if he is alive, like, it's gonna get worse. His mental, emotional, mental health type stuff. He was dealing with, like, literally a distinct wound to his emotions. His mother could have even impacted this in some way, potentially even indirectly. But yeah, it looks like Chiron was at 12 around that time. It really depends on when he was born. But regardless, it had to have been within orb. Chiron had to have been within orb of his moon. And I think I kind of had a psychic Freudian slip there, which I do very often. And said opposition, I meant that it was a square to Chiron, but there was an opposition as well that was greatly influencing that, and that would have been Moon Mars. And this is something that I really did want to touch on because it is a major indicator in this instance, and it's a major indicator because Mars, as I said before, is anger and aggression. It's the way that we go about expressing that. With it up against the moon, you can very often see that anger and aggression being posed in situations that are emotional, definitely, but very largely there can be an issue with what I would reference as the divine feminine. Women in general would have a way of setting him off, and actually the root of that would have began with mom. It would have began at home. He probably had altercations with mom. When I say altercations, I don't mean like physical altercations. I mean it's possible, definitely, but I mean more so that there would have been aggressive situations between him and women, unless he went the Cap Mars route, which is absolutely possible. And he had some sort of better ability to restrain himself around his family members. which probably would have acted in a way like the anger was being bottled up. It was really fascinating because as I was like thinking this, I heard something about Saturn. Like Saturn would be what would promote that if that was possible. And I wasn't even actively thinking about the fact that his moon is square Saturn. Yeah, see, that's really strange now that I'm kind of like digging into this further. I just got this like really strong feeling that he actually was like actively raised in an environment where like you don't hit women. But it's the restraint in that. Because there's a very good chance that he was in like a lot of situations at some point in his life, in his childhood, in which he probably needed to stand up for himself in some way, but he was afraid to in some way. I think that that might be Pluto conjunct his sun, potentially. There's some sort of fear there that I'm like feeling in relation to this. But that alone, like, did not serve him well because it caused mental health. It aided, is a better way of putting it, in certain mental health related stuff for him because there was repression, the repression of anger, of being able to express that anger. When he was kind of able to do that, it wasn't good. Or more so like, it could even be like the personality type that Gabby had, being more timid, being more... He wasn't afraid of her, not in the way that he was as a child of getting in some sort of trouble. And again, it all goes back to that. But all of this is so important because that T-square in general, like that was what, when I pulled up Brian's chart, like that's what I was led to. It was Chiron, Moon, Mars. Like it's action, it's anger, it's aggression, it's wounding, it's emotional fucked upness, like mental health related, not okay in the head. And regardless of how not okay you are in the head, that doesn't make it okay to kill people. I completely understand that. Again, I'm just speaking from this very unbiased place, which is what my mind tends to do. But that's like what would have been activated at this time for him, along with he had to struggle with depression. There's no way that he didn't. His moon Saturn square is much tighter than her moon Saturn conjunction in any way at any time that he would have been born. I just have a feeling that that is the case. Depression would have been a theme in his life, a very limited feeling, a very somber worldview is what I just heard. But I mean, yeah, that pretty much fits like exactly what I would say about moon Saturn. Like it is depressing, and it's interesting because again, this goes back to the mother again, and it would have been forged in his youth with her. Like she could have been depressed, she might suffer from mental health related shit herself, but it would limit emotional expression, definitely, and his ability to feel. And he would have been a very, very emotional person as a Cancer moon, so it would be really interesting how it would work. I could see that one also spiking even more like aggressive energy in emotional situations. In some way, shape, or form, there is a very, very good chance that Brian felt emotionally neglected by women, by the feminine. And right in the middle of recording this, I get tagged in a post that said that those bones were Brian's. So yeah. But what I am touching on right now is like the most important part of what I need to reiterate. And it's probably also why when I got up to shove a Pop-Tart in my mouth, I heard something about doing someone a favor. And that favor involved reiterating the fact that Gabby was not the aggressor. I kept getting flashed to her Mars retrograde. So this is like kind of a fucked up situation where I'm like beginning to feel like I might have been channeling Brian for the past couple weeks. And I should reiterate the fact that I mentioned a T-square being in his chart. There is a key in this T-square, and it connects back to events that occurred around February of this year, 2021. And I actually further, that was strengthened for me because at that point, like when this in general, this is where my logical mind has to transverse different octaves is a good way of putting it. I noticed this, what I'm about to say, in this chart as a whole. I noticed this via transit, but it was really fascinating to me because as I was like picking it up, I got a flash to that picture of Gabby and Brian with the rings on their fingers. those rings on their fingers, the time frame, like what I was being shown, and that was by her. That was Gabby's energy that I was connecting to, was that this is when this began, like aggressive type stuff began. It was after I had channeled something about it happening previously, but he was trying to stop. And then when I like looked at that picture, because I had seen it before, I was kind of tripped out by the time frame, because it aligns to like exactly what I was essentially searching for, like what occurred around that time. So obviously all of that is very largely intuitive, but it is interesting to me that it all aligned correctly. There's a really good chance that February of this year, there was certain events. There were things that occurred around that time. And that was far before they got in that van and drove across the country. But I was beginning to talk about neglect that he would feel in correlation to women as a whole. And right after I said that, like I said, right after I said that, I'm sorry, I had set my phone down and I went to get up to get a Pop-Tart to eat something because my husband's working late. What I mean is that typically I've eaten by now. It's like 7:30. And I got like some sort of flash, like correlating to that being true in relation to what I said about like emotional neglect, like from women. And that it was something that he sought to fill in partners. Kind of like the wounded little boy within him. What that would have correlated though to originally, which I already talked about, it's his mother. It was situations with her. As an astrologer, I can tell you hands down, and any astrologer would tell you this as a reference. Moon Saturn in general is just, it's a nasty aspect to see. It can just cultivate a really, really strong element of depression, definitely. And it can be incredibly hard for them to lift themselves out of that depression as well. But the other thing that can be incredibly hard with Moon square Saturn, and I need to just like reiterate that this is very, very largely intuitive, and I'm largely channeling in relation to him and the way that this manifested. Due to the somber mindset and due to the somber mood and due to very often being raised in situations where there was a lack of support on an emotional level is a good way of putting it. People with Moon Saturn, or maybe I should just say Brian Laundrie, because I'm getting this like really, really strongly, that there's a really good chance that he struggled a lot with empathy. And I don't mean this even necessarily in a narcissistic way. Like that is very possible, even though like I realize he did like a heinous thing. Like I understand that, but I don't necessarily get this really strong feeling that he was a narcissist. And I think that quality, along with not being a sociopath, is really hard for people who did know him and Gabby, because they feel like they were fooled by him in a lot of ways. Like they were potentially deceived by him. And I don't necessarily think that is as much the case as it is that, again, he did something really fucked up in the moment. But back to what I was getting to with that and the empathy element of it all. Because of that lack of emotional support and nurturing, you have to consider the fact that your nurturing and your upbringing very, very largely greatly shapes the way that you handle emotional situations in the future. So if you're raised in a situation or in a setting where your emotions are being limited, when it comes to nurturing other people especially, you can kind of suck at that because you don't know how to do what you did not receive, especially if you were never told that it wasn't right. I wanted to go back and clarify what I did say about Brian doing something fucked up in the moment. That was just my way of being able to reiterate that very, very quickly and in as few of words as possible. I just feel like this was an act of passion in a way. Again, there was a buildup, and it was his mental health that was the culprit behind all of that. But I have to try to find a way to put what I am getting about the limited emotions and the empathy into words, because it's not that he was incapable of empathy. And this is where it gets like a little bit crazy, definitely, and it's hard for me to explain this in words that make sense. It's about consciousness. So Brian had the ability to utilize empathy in situations where he was conscious that that was empathy that he should have received. But it's like he didn't have all of those light bulbs in his head, and this might even be neurological, literally, that I'm seeing. I really do not know. All I know is like what I'm receiving is like telling me essentially that like there were areas of darkness where he did not have that consciousness in moments where he should have been empathic, where he should have cared. Instead, he went cold in those moments, and it was due again to some sort of wounding on his behalf and his own trauma, ultimately, from childhood related situations where he was not able to express himself. So there was like this lack of empathy, this disconnect in certain situations where he should have been there, he should have showed up, he should have cared more. And most people would, who did not experience the things that he did, but everybody is fucked up in their own way. And I'm not excusing his behavior at all. That's not what I'm saying. I'm trying to bring to light that this is a thing. Emotional consciousness is a thing. Being able to understand how your experiences have impacted you and how they impact you emotionally is a thing. He might have had a few more areas of dark matter in his brain. I'm sorry, I laugh. It's not funny. I mean, it's just, it was like the way that I was seeing it. It was really, really interesting. Like the way that consciousness was being shown to me. And I know why I'm being shown this. It's due to the fact that he's a moon Sirius person. And that just takes us to an entirely new level of crazy that I don't even know if I have the time to touch on, because this is already like very, very long. But what I am speaking on is the fixed star Sirius at 14 degrees Cancer. I know that it was conjunct his moon in one way, shape, or form. And I know because I tapped into this, because I touched on this, because I said that it would be dogs, literally, quite literally animals, dogs, that would find this man. And I said that based on a theorized guess, ultimately, that he had moon Sirius, because Sirius is indeed the dog star. And I'm pretty sure that Sirius has been reiterated in like Harry Potter and stuff like that, like fanfic type stuff. I honestly do not know. I just, from what I've heard from people. But dogs literally do go crazy when Sirius energy is present in the sky. But Sirius as a whole connects to the ability to obtain emotional consciousness. Because ultimately, in being able to obtain emotional consciousness, you are able to connect to your soul, to your divine spark, to your essence. This is a fairly esoteric approach that I'm taking here, but what I said about dogs is not a lie. I made this joke in the very beginning of the hunt for Brian Laundrie in relation to Dog the Bounty Hunter being involved in this case. And I made this joke about it being funny to me that Dog the Bounty Hunter was involved in this case. And then I ended up finding out that Dog the Bounty Hunter literally did have Uranus conjunct Sirius. Sirius in general is known to be the light. There are many, many different ways to approach this. Sirius was widely celebrated by the Dogon tribe in Africa. They had knowledge and insight into the universe as a whole, we could say, that they could not possibly know. And they said that they were given it via beings from Sirius. Sirius also connects to ancient Egypt, and Sirius season was when the Nile ultimately flooded, and it was a time of fertility. There's a lot in relation to Sirius, and it is ancient knowledge, definitely, but dogs and emotional consciousness. And that emotional consciousness was definitely a struggle for Brian Laundrie. Being able to work through things within his psyche, within his subconscious, to rectify the root, to heal through certain things, it's all there. He had like a vast struggle between the masculine and feminine elements of his personality within him. And there was indefinitely an issue with empathy, and that issue with empathy was spiked in moments where he was pissed off. And I'm getting super strongly as well that, again, depression was always a theme. That was always an issue. There was always latent issues brewing beneath the surface and things that had been left unaddressed and were probably being medicated in some way rather than actually being looked at. But the breaking point from an astrological perspective was hands down, without a doubt, the cardinal energy. Chiron, Moon, Mars, Saturn. Chiron was also coming up to conjunct Saturn. It was conjunct Saturn, just it hadn't hit an exact point yet. And it all involved anger, emotion, women, femininity, wounded actions that ultimately stemmed from a wounded psyche. He also has another element to add to that, where his emotional needs, it's hard for him to have those met as well as to feel loved at the same time. The way that it works, you receive one or the other. I'm speaking on the Moon-Venus opposition. And when I look at this, like, I keep getting this, like, strong, it's like achievement, it's ambition. I mean, the Capricorn would definitely pose that anyways, but it almost like inferiority is what I'm feeling from it. Like, from a love-related standpoint, especially as a Mars and Capricorn person, like, he is driven to succeed. But there's something to that, like, where he might not have believed in himself or his ability to do that in some way. Okay, I know what I was getting. Venus in Capricorn within a man's chart, especially a straight man's chart. Venus represents feminine energy from a beauty-related standpoint, from an attraction-related standpoint. So what he's attracting to in women, ultimately, is women who have a sense of accomplishment, who have a sense of success, definitely. But from an emotional standpoint, like, what he would crave to feel nurtured is very, very comforting energy. It's like mom, traditional, motherly, maternal. So when you look at Capricorn and Cancer, the axis in general, Cancer is the mother, Capricorn is the father, from a traditional standpoint, from a dad is the breadwinner type standpoint, mom is the nurturer. Brian in general had like a major conflict within him in correlation to this, and I'm willing to bet that Gabby met the nurturing capacity, but there was something about the Venus standpoint that was like a struggle. And I think that the success, the accomplishment, and I think that was what she was like touching on and pointing on in relation to him being a bummer and him being a downer and him not believing in her and what she was capable of doing with social media and all of that stuff. I mean, to be specific, I know exactly what that is. It's a Saturn conjunct her Jupiter. And the worst part about it is that he ultimately was self-sabotaging himself within that situation, because the girl was here to shine. Like, if he would have just allowed her to do that shining, she probably would have became exactly what he was pushing her to become. But there's something to that as well, and that comes from his Scorpio sun square her nodal axis. That could manifest in so many different ways, but it probably was like a fear of her leaving him or something like that, her being too seen. He probably didn't like people seeing her on social media, on Instagram, which again goes back to inferiority, definitely, but it's beyond that as well. There's like this desire to remain hidden, but she was not to be hidden. But there's something to that too, which that's in the body cam footage, quite literally. But there's something to that in correlation to probably what like was setting him off. Which again, this might sound like common sense, but I'm saying that I can see it here as well, because there's something about it. I'm feeling this like major inferiority. Like it's his inferiority. It might have been projected onto her, but it's him who felt like he wasn't capable of providing or doing something. But the way that it was weird, like I was looking at this T-square, and like the feeling that I got from it almost was like this feeling of being trapped by family in a way, like wanting to succeed, wanting to branch out, wanting to go, but like there's a limited, like family limited this in some sense, and I don't know if that's because they like demanded time and attention or like what exactly it is, but I felt it. Like he wanted to do this and he wanted to go and do this and be this way, but they like, it's your family, you need to come home, you need to be around us. Like he had like dreams of his own, but was not able to do that, and the limitation, like, is the family. Like, they did pose that in some way, but there's also, again, this inferiority energy where he didn't believe in himself as well. Like, he could have even done this, but he didn't have that belief in himself. Gabby was the one who was the ticket out of that. She was the one that was going to fix or rectify or solve that. Yeah, I know why I'm feeling that, because of Libra. The Libra energy. Because partnership would be his ticket out of that. Relationships would be his, like, way out of that maze, is a good way of putting it. But it's really fascinating in that instance, because it's like, even if that was the case, the same problems were posed, and that's because he never dealt with the root. He never healed the issue, the true concern, the home, family, where it came from to begin with. It was never dealt with. It could have been if that was healed through, and different, obviously, actions were taken, a different course was taken. But it's like almost this feeling of not knowing any better, but that's not the way to put it, because that's very, very excusing of behavior, and that's not what I mean at all. It's like that was what he always knew, so he did what he always knew. Moral of the story, this is why you need to handle your fucking shit. That's not to say that everybody is going to, be Brian Laundrie. That takes a unique individual, but it is mental health. Like, you need to handle your shit. But even more than that, I mean, it's so much bigger than that. Like, if Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie were to teach the world anything, with Gabby, it's really tough to just limit it to domestic abuse as well as missing people, because that's so simple, and I feel like she deserves more. Gabby's message is a tale as old as time. Kind of ironically, I mean, literally, Beauty and the Beast. It would be easy to say that you could go the route of feminism, but feminism as a whole is riddled with so many rules of who we are supposed to be and what we're supposed to do, and I don't think that Gabby would have wanted to fit into a box. Or more so, I don't feel like she would have wanted her message to enclose people. So you could go the route of saying that we need to teach girls that they can do anything, and they can be anything, and they can be strong, and they can be brave. Or you can say that we need to be more observant of people in relationships and be more attentive of the signs and the clues. But I don't necessarily feel that that's the route either. It begins with children, and Gabby, of all people, as a Leo North Node, she would know that. That's where you teach little girls to not excuse bad behaviors. And I by no means mean that this is like what needed to happen with Gabby. That's not where I'm headed with that. This would be an entire curriculum in itself that would need to be formed. And it's not just about targeting any one subset of people that are soft and gentle like Gabby. It's everyone. You want to stop things like this from occurring in the world? You got to teach people how to love. You got to teach them how to love right. You have to teach them to love themselves so that they in turn can love others. You want to stop things like this from occurring with people like Brian Laundrie, or at the hands of Brian Laundrie like people. You have to teach people to handle their shit, but even more so, how to handle their shit. And that doesn't involve just slapping a label on them and saying, okay, you're good to go. You have to bring psychiatrists into the field of therapy and psychology who make people feel comfortable in their own skin. Not people who you're sitting across from as a patient thinking to yourself, you're more fucked up than me. But all of that is fortified through the ability to make certain things known on a societal-wide level of what is kind, what is not kind, what is okay, what is not okay. You have to pump the people with kindness. Now, I'm not by any means saying that people should have been kind to Brian Laundrie. However, if you go and look at Brian Laundrie's Instagram, or you go and you look at message boards, Twitter posts, if If you consider the fact that his family has received death threats, the exact same people who are telling Brian Laundrie that they're going to kill him are just as bad as Brian Laundrie. And it might feel like this speech that I'm giving right now is just me beating a dead horse, but I am a Pisces, so you listen up. The key to solving the riddle, the tale as old as time. It involves consciousness on all sides. And kind of in a way, it's fucked up to say that... I realized that was like a super rhyme right there. Just bear with me. To stop things like this from occurring in the world, the answer is to save the world. But it's true. Kindness and love and empathy and compassion and the energetic exchanges that we have that involve these things, it spreads like a plague. And that is it. That is the solution. The answer is love and a lack of division. And that's the answer to absolutely everything. And I think that I am finally done here. Bye.
I'm so tired of you always playing with my heart. I don't know if I can go on much longer.
Back in my journal, and I found where I had wrote down twice. Follow the path of least resistance. And this was months ago. Back in August, it looks like right around the time that all of this would have occurred for her. I wrote this down multiple times. The path of least resistance. And I didn't even know why I was being told this until today. When I went to look at that map for, I don't even know how the fuck you say that. And that was literally the pathway. It's POLR, path of least resistance. I was like, are you fucking kidding me right now? Like, that's what I mean by this case, like, doing something to me. Like, I was channeling insight in relation to this far before, and it's crazy. I wanted to kind of edit this now that it is Friday, October 22nd, because I have decided to release this publicly, but I kind of want to say that I was in the middle of recording this yesterday, ultimately, when I was tagged in like a live news video by somebody on my friends list that was outlining the fact that the remains that were found in the Carlton Reserve were indeed Brian Laundrie's. And it was really interesting, but not because I am an incredibly intuitive person, that like midway into recording this, I got this like really strong feeling that I might not want to release it. I got hit with this like really, really heavy energy. Ultimately, I'm posting this on my YouTube, which is very, very old and very not used because I want to put it somewhere. It needs to be somewhere. But I kind of wanted to reiterate, like, it's really, really hard for me to consolidate this. This was not like a situation that I sought out or was seeking out as a highly intuitive psychic individual. It was not like that. If it was, I would have been a hell of a lot more public with it, is a good way of putting it. Instead, the insight and the intuition that I was receiving, I tried sending that directly to the source. But I can't like document it all in this video to show the accuracy in a lot of the things that I did predict ultimately. And there's a lot of things that I probably will never gain actual concrete clarity on either, as there's a very good chance that either it could have been static, that's very, very possible, but it also could not be public in nature. But this entire case, like, I was clairvoyantly seeing it before it occurred, before news stuff was released, like via the media. I was seeing it. This was one of the craziest experiences that I have ever had within my life, and at this point in time, it is incredibly hard to shock and amaze me.